Commence primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
And today we are back again with Dr. Bruce Hutchinson.
Great to be back once again, although not in person this time.
Yeah, we're all back.
Yeah. We're actually, I think it's the first time I've seen your face, Bruce, in like 6 months. Because normally you wear a mask when you come to
that's true.
That's right. Yeah, I've been wearing a mask during our podcast. So
and he never takes it off, even when he's there. Proof.
Yeah.
Well, we were discussing, since the last time we did Atomic Blonde, what's the movie we could do. And we kind of got closer and closer to Christmas time. And what better movie than Die Hard?
It was my suggestion, actually.
It was. And
because we've been talking about a couple other ones, which I won't spoil because we may, come back to them someday. But there were some fun ideas. But then I was like, fuck, I've never seen Die Hard. And I know that's like a cinema sin or whatever. And or like a testosterone sin. I don't know what it is. It's some kind of sin.
It's all.
I've been told it's a sin. Yeah. So I was like, well, fuck it. I hear that's always like the cool kid Christmas movie answer. You know what I mean? Like that's always like the LOL. Gotcha with my Christmas movie pick.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's. I don't know what to say. I love the movie so much. I'm glad we're getting to do it. And clearly, now that you've seen it, Daniel, you can see a lot of the things that I do in the movies I make. You can see a lot of that in there, like almost like shot for shot kind of stuff. But if you haven't yet, listeners, go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, hit the like button, comment. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Of course, go look at the script, read the script, go watch the movie, and then come back and listen to us discuss all the little things we're fixing to discuss. So let's start it off. Who wants to go first? Any
Well, we got to hear from Daniel first and just get his
general
initial
impressions.
reaction.
Well, we should do that from everybody. So I'll start, obviously.
Yeah, go for
never
it.
seen it. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I wasn't sure what exact. I mean, yeah, right. I knew I was getting into kind of a 80s action film, and so I was prepared for that in all the ways that you kind of prepare yourself mentally for what's going to come. And so like there was definitely times where I chuckled because of some of the action, feeling a little silly nowadays, or some of the liners you're like, oh, okay, that's or some things were just a little funny to me in retrospect. Alan Rickman is funny at times unintentionally, just as a modern viewer, but even in that there was a lot of charm to it that I really enjoyed, that it was like, I don't even care. Like I'm still just rolling with it. John McClane's like just your iconic 80s action, like a normal guy who gets caught up, in a bad situation and he's got to find, I mean, it's just so nostalgic of an era of movies. Even though I've never seen Die Hard, I feel like I'm familiar with it. And it kind of felt like watching a nostalgic movie in a weird way. But no, I really had a lot of fun. I mean, the one-liners are great throughout, and there's a lot of them. And they just like, there was some that I've known are in there that I was like, holy shit, this came now. I thought this was going to be like, like an end of the movie, a one-liner, the yippee-ki-yay motherfucker, like ones like that are like iconic. But no, I really enjoyed it. Alan Rickman's great. Bruce Willis is great. It's just a fun 80s classic action film. I loved seeing the prequel to Family Matters as well was included in the film. Obviously. I literally looked up, I was like, when did Family Matters start? I was like, literally 1 year after this movie came out. So somebody watched this movie, said, fuck, that cop guy could be in his own sitcom, and just threw him into it. It's great.
Water went down the wrong pipe. Sorry, there.
It's okay.
I know you're choked up.
Over
you're choked.
Yeah, that's right.
You're choked up from that poetic review.
That glowing review.
Yeah,
that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Let me go next. I'm too excited. Fuck all your criticisms, Daniel. No,
that was a glowing review.
It was a glowing review, especially for you. You're not really an action movie kind of guy. Like you like action, but not like these kind of straight up action, just action movies kind of stuff.
Not as my daily. not as my daily writer now.
This movie, it's one of those ones to me that when you watch it, I think, man, is this my favorite movie of all time? And then it's like, it could be like, it's one of those, it's a contender easily. And then if someone asked me what's the best action movie of all time, I could easily say, if someone said Die Hard, I would say, I can't argue with you. Like, I would agree with you. I think that everything from the performances to just the fun action, like the really raw
is that flashing?
Action
Are you watching the movie right now? Is that
it's playing. It's playing in front of me. Yes.
Okay. It's just like flashing on your face. This blue light.
He's in the vents right now.
It's great.
And
Classic.
So between the performances, the raw action, just even the camera moves and the score and the charm from the character, and you hear this adage, die hard on a bus, die hard, in a retirement home, whatever. That's because Die Hard, it kind of popularized this type of movie, and it's been done before in other ways, but this made it like huge and mainstream. And it's because it's a really good movie. Even if you don't like action movies, it's got a lot of different things that hits on the head, and a lot of movies have tried to replicate it, and a lot have failed, and some have done a good job. But I just think, and also I love Christmas. Yeah. And I think and I love it.
I'll add to that. I mean, I know it was a Christmas movie, but I was surprised how many Christmas songs, and like, it's like pretty heavily themed Christmas. I thought it was like, oh, it just takes place on Christmas Eve with some Christmas decor. It was like, no, fuck. There was like Christmas songs as part of the score. I liked it.
Yeah. What's really cool, if you guys get a chance, if you ever want to, is go back and watch it with the director's commentary. And then also there's a cinematographer commentary. They have it like on some of the special features. And John DeBont, he was a cinematographer on this. He was a French cinematographer. He ended up going to direct Speed. It's he's really, really talented, and it really shows. But anyway, Bruce, what do you think about the movie?
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I enjoy the movie. I came at it thinking about kind of what makes it unusual or interesting, and obviously, it's done a lot of the stuff that you guys have talked about. I think when we get into it, there's some really cool, interesting narrative things that the movie does that you don't necessarily think about, but maybe violate some of the rules that we're told about screenwriting. I think one of the main things is that I didn't really think about, so I watched it this time, is how often Bruce Willis, John McClane's, is not in the movie.
Especially like that first half, I feel like.
Well, not even the first half, like Act 3, and again, probably 4 acts, but Act 3, like, after Sergeant Powell shows up and he's like, okay, I just want you to lay low. Of course, he doesn't lay low for the next 30 minutes, but he actually lays low for a fair amount of the third act. He's not really doing anything. So
I noticed that as well. Yeah, he stays in that like that construction part, and he's like, a lot of stuff will happen, and then it'll check back in. And he's like, "How you doing up there?" And he's like, "Yep, still here." And you're like, "Oh, okay, yes, yes, he is."
So the movie bounces around a lot, and does some really interesting things. But nevertheless, I mean, the action really works, and another thing I just mentioned, Sergeant Powell. He's a major character who isn't introduced until basically the second half of the movie. That he shows up right before the midpoint of the movie, and then he's really developed as a character in the second half, and he's obviously a huge part of the experience of the movie. So this idea of introducing a new character that late is not something that we're often
well, it's one thing
to do, but
it's interesting you said that. There's one thing to that point was that after I finished watching it or reading the script, because I've never read it before, they had this line about partner in there, and I was like, my God, this is a buddy cop movie. Like I've never thought of it like that before.
You're right.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's a buddy cop movie. It's just like, it's such a different buddy cop movie. And anyway, it kind of after all these years, it shifted my perspective a little bit. Like, that's so interesting. But yeah, no, I love everything.
That is
you just
interesting.
said.
I hadn't thought of that. I mean, I really enjoyed Powell. Even though again, it just felt like literally out of the book of like your classic cop movie scenarios, but like the superior who's an idiot, who's just a fucking idiot, where he was just like I was like listening to their argument at one point. I was like, he doesn't even have a good point. Like in no sense is this superior officer saying anything smart. Like he's just ignoring evidence. He's like, oh, some dead body? It was probably a stockbroker that killed himself. You're like, what?
Of course,
there
you
is
know,
some,
we'll get into that when we talk about it, but I don't think you could get away with a line like that anymore, by the way. You know, I
there's
think
a lot.
There's a lot. There's quite a few things. Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to make him a little smarter than that. Like, you know, you'd actually
he
have
feels
to figure it
unbelievably
out.
dumb. Yes, he feels unbelievably dumb. And but it was still enjoyable because he was like, they made him such an asshole. You enjoyed when he got made look like an asshole. You're like, oh, that's fun. I'm glad.
Yeah.
There's also there's a few pop culture things too. So when I was watching it, I was thinking, man, you know, a lot of these guys have died and who were in this movie. How sad is that? And so, you know, of course, Alan Rickman is the main person that everyone knows. That was obviously such a tragedy. Lesser known is Alexander Goodenough, who plays I forget his name, but the main blonde bad guy who shows up at the movie.
I can't believe his name.
It's Klaus.
Klaus.
He was in Witness also, with Harrison Ford and Kelly McGillis, and he was a former I think ballet dancer.
Wow.
So he's a really interesting guy. And then I was like, and Reginald Vell Johnson is dead. How sad is that? And then I was like, is Reginald Vell Johnson dead? So I Googled it. He's not dead, but he's one of those guys who everyone thought had died. So there was this whole hoax a couple of years ago where I guess I heard it and then decided he had died, but he hasn't. And then I've also got to mention, I don't know how much you guys know about all of the stuff with John McTiernan.
I do.
Serving time.
Yeah.
He got embroiled in this whole big deal in Hollywood about 10 years ago where he had hired this private investigator named Anthony Pellicano and had gotten this guy to wiretap producers and all this stuff. And I guess he'd become a little bit paranoid and he lied to the FBI about all this. And then he ended up going to jail. I don't know all the details of it, but yeah, that's a pretty, it's kind of interesting.
He got out
like story as well.
He got out around 2014 or 15, I believe. It's interesting. I mean, Luke, John, to me, if someone said John McTiernan is in my top 5 favorite directors of all time. He is, because Die Hard 3, Last Action Hero, and he also did
Hunt for Red October.
Hunt for October. He's just he's amazing. He's only done like 7 or 8 movies. He did Rollerball, which is this, I don't really like that movie, but Rollerball, and then he did Basic with Samuel Jackson. But he's a talented director, and he was supposed to be making a movie in the last 3 years, but he just hasn't still, I think, put it out yet. But he is I think he's just so good.
Wait, someone hired him to make another movie after he wiretapped producers' phones.
Yeah,
that's surprising. I mean,
I'm not sure he ever finished it. I know he ended up at one point directing a commercial for Call of Duty or something for the game, and then anyway, I kind of fell off the John McTiernan information train a long time ago, but I was following him. Oh yeah, Nomads, that was it. That's what he was doing. Oh yeah, Thomas Crown Affair. Okay. Predator. Fuck, that's the one I was trying to think of. He did Predator, so that's
I've never heard of it.
That's the big one I was trying to think of. But there's some interesting things there, and
it's worth a Google. It sounds like it's worth a Google.
It's kind of interesting, and at the time, it was a huge story in Hollywood. With all this kind of stuff, and I think it had other repercussions, sort of that went beyond that. I don't remember all the details. Also want to mention one more thing before we kind of dig into it. I do, as we go through, I do want to talk a little bit about just, because of the time we're in, the Holly Gennaro character and ways in which the movie, I think, tries to be progressive with a female character, but then also ways in which it
shows its age.
Kind of falls back a little bit. And and I'm not meaning this in any kind of, PC takedown of the movie. I mean, it was made 35 years ago, but it is worth just kind of examining sort of little interesting details about that and exactly how well does it sort of hold up or not and stuff like that. So
I find it hard not to notice that. I think just watching older movies and just kind of noticing lines that I'm like, wow, that line doesn't come off as like crazy, but it would never be said.
Yeah,
in a
there was things
movie,
I felt like that was in the script that that was even more problematic that was in the movie, and I was
which
like,
makes
oh,
a lot
good.
of sense.
Yeah, I was like, oh, good, that's not in the movie. I was like, good. Yeah. There's some ways John talks to her in the beginning. I was like, that wouldn't work today. It doesn't really work at all, but you know what I'm saying. Let's dive in, boys. Let's start from the beginning. So
juice. Get into the juice.
Yeah, juice. So let's talk Act 1. Where do we think Act 1 ends?
Oh, let me get my notes out.
Yeah, I'm getting my notes as well.
I mean, for me, it's probably like around when what's his name dies?
Takaka.
Yeah, exactly. Takaka.
Takagi. Thank you.
Takagi, yes. Which another
you guys just totally dropped the PC ball on that whole thing, by the way. I just want to...
We did. Well, I kept wanting to say Nakatomi, but I was like, but that was just the name of the tower. Did they dub his? Did they have an American guy like dub over that guy's accent? It was like they didn't match. It was very strange for me. Really? And it felt like sometimes he had an accent, but then sometimes he had like almost a John Wayne voice. I don't know.
No, I think it was his original voice, and I suspect that the actor was just, I didn't Google his background, but I think he probably was probably a long time American in the sense, that he didn't have a Japanese accent or anything like that. And he does have sort of this richer, almost baritone voice. And he's representing this Japanese company, and there's a little inflection a little bit, but overall, I think he's, it is his voice.
Sorry, but to go back to the plot, for me, that was about 30-ish pages in.
It's about 32 minutes in when he gets shot.
Yeah, and so to me, that's obviously when things get like real, even in the plot. It's kind of like when the characters are realizing like, oh shit, these guys are like evil, bad people that will kill us. It's kind of when the tone shifts as well for everyone, when they're like, tell that to Mr. Tanaki and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, for me, that to me felt like a kind of the end of the act for me right there.
Yeah.
Well, I guess his death for me would be like the end of the act. Mine.
What do you think, Bruce?
Yeah, I agree. At first it's a little confusing to figure out where I think Act 1 ends, partly because, I think if you put the inciting incident as the, when they sort of storm the 30th floor and everybody, oh my gosh, these guys are coming in with the weapons and holding everyone hostage, that's like 25 minutes into the movie. It's a pretty late inciting incident, although it does have a setup and payoff, because it's set up probably 10 minutes earlier when we first start seeing the truck come in and we see the security guard getting shot, which again, from a sort of storytelling point of view, raises a really interesting question, which is it an inciting incident if the protagonist doesn't know it's happened yet? So this is one of those things where we know the status quo has been changed, right? But McClane does not know the status quo has been changed when they initially show up, right? And then about 10 minutes later, he's, doing his toes in the bathroom floor, and then he hears the gunfire, and that's where his status quo shifts, right? And where it's the true inciting incident for him, which almost feels like it could be an Act 1 climax all by itself, right there.
Yeah.
And that was my first thought. It was like, oh, well, I guess 20-ish, we're almost 30 minutes in, and then they
that was kind of my first kind of like breakdown, or it was kind of like that 20-minute mark when the gunshot goes off and he's in the hotel room is kind of my first shit's hitting the fan kind of area. Yeah.
I agree kind of on when I was reading the script and thinking about it some more after I'd watched the movie, Takagi's killing, I think, is sort of that Act 1 climax, so we've got the disruption of the status quo, then we've got another 7 or 8 minutes, Takagi is murdered. Now we know that shit's real, like you said, someone's now been killed. This isn't just for show. These guys are serious. Someone dies. And I think that kind of launches us into Act 2.
Well, it's a big driver for John, right? I mean, he comes out of like, oh, I could have saved him. Why didn't I save him or whatever? That becomes a big catalyst for him taking more drastic action. Right, for him doing
it is
more.
Interesting though, because this is another thing that's a little interesting about the movie, which is what the Act 2 goal is, because for me the Act 2 goal is to get help, that is to get the police to show up,
or the fire department or whoever.
To get attention, right? And when we get to Act 2 climax, I think it'll be when he successfully does that. But he actually is already kind of trying to do that in Act 1. That is, it's not like Takagi shot and then he's like, okay, I've got to figure out how to get help here.
Right.
We actually see him when he hears the gunfire,
he's talking to
25 minutes. Yeah, and then he runs upstairs, right? He gets his gun. He doesn't have his shoes. He runs upstairs and he's sort of trying to get away, but also sort of scope things out. And then there's a line where he's like, come on, John, think, what can you do? And he looks out the window and he sees the scantily clad woman in the apartment across the way. But even then, the idea is been set up, which is how does he get help, right? How does he alert the authorities given that the phone lines don't work?
And when he saw that woman, by the way, I kind of want him to just like take a couple pot shots, see if he can get her attention. Like, shoo, like, hey, call the police now. At least call the police because you were shot at. You know what I mean?
Of course, but then that alerts the terrorist that he's there also. But yeah, and so he's already thinking about that goal, but then he doesn't really have time to deal with it. He goes back down. He's in the sort of little museum room or showroom, whatever you want to call it. And then he witnesses the murder of Takagi. He hides out. They move on. And then you're right. He has that line about, you could have done something. And then from there, that goal of getting help becomes more specific, right? As he calls the fire department and then he gets the radio and all that kind of stuff. So.
I think it's kind of like his goal doesn't change, but it kind of, I obviously it ups the stakes just in terms of like someone's dead now, and so I think that's obviously got to play into it. But it also, I think it almost like it focuses his goal to be more direct. You know what I mean? Because at first it's just, but I think that works. It's very believable too, because it feels like this is what a normal person would do, even a cop in this situation is just try to get help first, and he does that.
I have so many thoughts.
He does that until the help like shows itself to be so incompetent that it doesn't matter, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
a couple things. First of all, is it now? I've said this my whole life. Now that we have this conversation, I can't think of his fucking name. Is it Takagi? Takagi. I'm getting it mixed up.
AGI Takagi.
I've never had an issue till just this conversation. Takagi. So for me, and I've said this like in my time at UCA teaching, or just whenever I've talked to people in pre-production for my own movies, the scene where Takagi gets killed is like my favorite example of an escalation of danger, of visually showing in a movie like, oh, the stakes have completely changed now. Because, and one thing great about Alan Rickman and his goons in the movie that I think kind of separates them from other villains is that they're very charming, that they're having fun, they smile, they crack jokes, and it's not like they're just completely evil, and because you get a lot of that, building up to them and their personalities, and you get a lot with Alan Rickman throughout the whole movie. But whenever Takagi gets killed, it's just like this whole flip, and it's like the color red on the wall and all that kind of stuff. It just symbolizes danger. And when it's when he gets his head blown off, and it's just the way they push him and John McClane, all that's great, and I love it. And to your point, Daniel, what him doing all these things, searching for help instead of just becoming this action badass and going in and just like knocking down doors and killing them all. That's what makes this movie so great. He doesn't have his shoes on. He is actually trying to be intelligent. He's like, I'm one man. There's people and hostages. If I could die if I try to take them all at once or not try to be strategic about it. And I think it's just something that's so unique, especially for the time, because this is like 87. This movie come out 88. So like up until that point, early 80s, mid 80s, we had Stallone and Arnold coming in, just who had the higher body count kind of situation. Rambo, Terminator 1, you had not Total Recall, but you had like Running Man and Commando and all those kind of movies. You had Rambo 1, 2, 1 and 2 and all that kind of stuff. And Bruce Willis coming in off of the TV show Moonlighting. And, he was just a guy that wasn't this action hero guy. And they cast him for this, and I love it. I could talk about this movie all day long, but no, I think it's great. Yeah. I do want to discuss like some of what he wants, why he's doing when he's arriving at the airport. Why is he in LA? What's Alan Rickman characters want? What does Holly want? All these kind of things. I do want to get into that kind of stuff too.
Let me, one more note for the Takagi killing was, it was like when Alan Rickman said that line, it was like it would be a shame to get that nice suit all dirty. I was like, oh my God, is this the origin of that trope? That one trope liner? Because I feel like that is a line that gets repeated in so many, like everything. Like it would be a shame to get your dress all dirty. Like it was just like,
well, what's great is in the previous scene, not to kind of jump around, but in the previous scene, he's in the elevator and he's trying to be like this hoity-toity kind of villain. He's like, oh, I read it in Forbes, and
no. He says something like, he says something like on the nose, and I feel like they're trying to tell us with visuals, but he says something like, I got a formal so he's like, that's something a formal education would tell you. And I feel like they're like just trying to tell us that he's educated, but the only way they could do it was for him to tell us that he was.
I didn't get that so much. I got more that like, I don't know. He's got some type of, he's got an ego. Obviously, he thinks he's so smart and everything.
Sure.
I don't know. I think his performance sells it well enough where he's not aware of it when he's doing it. Yeah. Anyway, I love it. I think it's
something
amazing.
A formal education would tell you.
Well, he talks about the John Phillips suit. He actually sets that up by saying he's got to himself.
That's right.
I think he's kind of having fun with that. I mean, I think it's not just that he's telling us that he's this refined person, but he enjoys playing with everyone else's expectations of what a villain is supposed to be. And not a villain, but like this terrorist, he's presenting himself as a terrorist, but he likes getting the looks when he talks about, the suits and the education. One or two more things about Takagi's scene. And yes, I want to go back to the beginning too. The one actor you mentioned, kind of the difference between all the other 80s movies, I think Die Hard feels very much like a Harrison Ford movie, because the Harrison Ford movies of the 80s and 90s were very much in a similar vein. They were the everyman who is, in the year after this, Harrison Ford's movie Frantic came out, where he's an everyday, he's a doctor in Paris, and it's sort of North by Northwest case of mistaken identity, and suddenly he's being pursued by all these bad guys, and his wife's been kidnapped, and it's sort of like, what does an everyday guy do in that situation? And then, of course, just a few years later, we have the super classic, The Fugitive, which maybe we ought to do someday. It'd be a great,
such a good movie.
I would love to do it. You let me know when.
But now
boys.
that you said that, I could totally just watch this movie in my head with Harrison instead of Bruce, and it works great. I mean, it works just as good.
Yeah. It's the same kind of character. Now, I think the big difference between them, of course, is Harrison Ford was not a gun guy, right? I mean, even in all the Indiana Jones movies, he rarely shoots or fires a gun. I mean, he has one, but he kills. I think he shoots people occasionally, obviously.
Well, he shoots the sword guy.
Shoots the guy, yeah.
Yeah.
But he's not necessarily a running around blasting a gun kind of guy. But otherwise, he very much fits into that mold of the everyman. And I think we see the same thing with Bruce Willis. Of course, it's interesting to watch all of the Die Hard movies and see how that changes until by whatever the fifth one, he's like jumping onto an F-16 or whatever, just
oh my God. How did they narratively justify that escalation? That's what I need to know.
Hey,
does he get brought into the special forces in one of these movies? Is that like,
Die
oh my
Hard
God,
4 is
what you did in Die Hard 1? You're now a Navy SEAL. You know what I mean?
Die Hard 4 is awesome. It's called Live, Fear, Die Hard. Fourth one's awesome. The fifth one, A Good Day to Die Hard, I've only seen it one time.
That tells me a lot.
And I saw it in theaters, and it's Die Hard, and I've still seen it only one time.
That tells me all I need to know.
Now, Die Hard, I think Die Hard 2 is it's basically just the first one, literally the first movie again. But Die Hard 3, I think is fucking phenomenal. But that's just also directed by John McTiernan. He took a break for 2 and he come back for 3. Yeah. But 3 is fucking the bee's knees, boys. But anyway, I digress.
One last little thing that I just can't help but bring up in the shooting of Takagi. One thing that's always bothered me about that moment is that it's not cut fast enough. When he says, like, you're just going to have to kill me, and Alan Rickman says, okay, and he pulls up his gun, and then they cut to the shot of Takagi, and it's a dummy, it's not a real person. And they hold on it just long enough where there's literally no motion in Takagi. There's no breathing. There's no nothing. And then, you see him get shot in the head, and you see the head go back. And it's always just bothered me because it's like, you just need to trim a few frames off the front of that shot so that we cut, and his head's already going back. But,
But to me, that felt like normal, a little bit like normal 80s action. Like that's kind of what
80s cutting for sure. It's a slightly slower 80s cutting style, but it's just kind of funny because I think we, in a lot of ways I like the older style, but that's one place where it's just like, you just needed to cut a little faster, and you would have covered your dummy perfectly well. But let's get to character. Let's get to.
Don't mess with perfection, Bruce. It's a perfect film. No, one thing you said, slow pace. That's one thing I love is. I almost said the ballsiness, but it wasn't really that ballsy back then. Maybe it's just the willingness to hold a frame on a character and not cut.
Yeah.
I love it. And I just, I wish we didn't have such short attention spans now.
It helps when you frame shots really well, and
it does help. It makes a difference. But sometimes there's honestly not shots that I'm like, oh, I can't see that person talking. But he holds on them. He holds on the scene anyway. And granted, you're getting the reaction. You're getting that like in a wide shot. But there's still sometimes I'm like, man, you wouldn't see that today, and I really miss it, really bad. Yeah. No, let's talk about character. You're right, Bruce. So the movie starts off, of course, with John McClane landing.
Yeah.
And there's a great way to you kind of wonder, why is this guy talking about, or being sick and everything, and what's all this leading to? And of course it's a fish out of water scenario. And the big thing is it kind of sets up that he's a cop, because he gets to have that one line, oh, don't worry, I've been a cop for 11 years.
Yeah.
So it kind of all does just for that one line, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So
I think it's even more than that, though, because, we were talking about the everyman, and I think it really does set him up as the everyman, because we open on a guy who is afraid of flying.
Right.
He is clearly nervous, and even, when we see the gun and find out he's a cop, he's the one who's been afraid, and it's the salesman next to him who's giving him the advice on how to be calm and relaxed, and so I think that that's a great moment in that scene. And then of course, in case you're not sure whether you should take Bruce Willis as a sex symbol or not, he pulls the teddy bear down, and the flight attendant, gives him the double take.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
It almost seemed like they had like a locked eyes moment for a second. Like, which happens like, it's like there's not. You don't get many John McClane scenes where there's not a poster or scantily clad women across the building, or he locks eyes with the stewardess, or a hot chick in a white dress comes running past and he looks at her ass and says California or something. Like, it just feels like, which, and I actually think it worked really well to set up, to give us some like pre-context to the marriage relationship, right? To kind of, so that when you start understanding like, oh, they're married and like all this stuff, you're like, I already understand everything's not cool. You know what I mean? Right. Like there's something going on there. Yeah. Even just in how he's interacting with all these women, and like, looks like he's trying to just pick up anyone if he could.
Well, it's what's interesting, because in the script, it kind of talks about how like they had this line, or she even talks to him. It's more engaging between them in the beginning. And in the movie, it seemed it had this, well, in the script, it's like what could have been, I guess, was said in the script. Yeah. And between the two of them, and it is kind of weird, because it feels like whenever he's around Holly, it's all about Holly, like the way he looks at her, the way he is around her. But in the beginning there is that kind of look, and I really never got, until I read the script, that he was like, oh, what could have been. It was just more of like, I don't know, almost like it doesn't really match with his character almost, for me personally. I can see it, of course. A cute girl looks at you, married or not, you might smile because that's human nature, maybe. But I don't know. I think it kind of doesn't really track as well, actually. But
it made sense to me once I realized they hadn't like been together in like they hadn't seen each other in 6 months or something like that. Yeah. And like that, and then it's just kind of like, it's fizzling out. It was kind of how they were trying to say, and even her with like the dude Ellis, or is it Ellis, right? Like is the douchebag that like tries to get her. He's like, I'm talking like a fire and whatever the fuck else he was like, mull wine, And she doesn't shut him down completely. She just kind of like smiles and is like, nah. Like, it's just kind of this like soft, like, you can tell she considers it for a second. At least that's how I read it. So to me, it felt like they were on both sides trying to kind of set up like, oh, these people are kind of not, I guess they're both kind of looking at other options, but then when they get in the same room, they kind of remember why they love each other, I guess. Is kind of how it felt to me. And it's kind of like, They do cut it back though in the movie compared to the script, and I do think that goes a little bit to what Donovan's saying, and maybe I'm reading it from that. Yeah, there's a little more flirting in terms of the back and forth, and then as you said, the description is McClane smiles with just enough of a side to know he's as wistful about things that might have been as she is. But when that moment plays out, it feels a little more one-sided, because if I remember the framing of the shot, even McClane's back is to the camera, like he has stood up. So the camera's in the front of the plane. He has stood up, and then he's turned around to pull the teddy bear down, and the steward or the flight attendant goes past him and then kind of looks over her shoulder at him. We see her expression. I don't really remember that we see his expression. No, and I'm more thinking like, the girl in the white girl, the girl in the white gown or whatever that was, that runs when he's in the airport terminal after he leaves. Well, but she's almost like a little ski outfit or something, and she runs past him and then jumps into the arms of another guy. And then he's like, oh, California. Right. And I think, to me, there's almost it's sort of like, to me, the way I read that moment is, well, she's hot, but she's not my kind of woman, right? Holly is kind of the more, she's attractive, but she's solid New Yorker, versus these, I think almost there's a sense of like blonde bimbo kind of feel to that girl in the airport that we're supposed to think, oh, this isn't for John. It's interesting. And I mentioned talking about Holly, but I want to mention the other
as you mentioned, Daniel, I mean, we've got a Playboy centerfold that he passes by twice. Which
was actually funny when the next time he like taps.
I love it. He goes, girl. He goes, girls.
That was great. Yes, that was great. I love
yeah,
that.
It's great. Yeah.
We have the couple who are trying to find a room to have sex in, and then when the raid happens, so to speak, she's topless. And we see her twice, I think, and then we've got the woman across the hall. So in the first act and second act we get a lot of topless women, which I think is partly just 80s, a little exploitation. You've got to kind of have the toplessness,
especially the shot to the scantily drag, like the woman across the way. Yeah. That one definitely felt like that. Less so with the lady that was like they were having sex, only because like when you do see her topless, it's not like they like try to set it up as like a moment to glare.
No, but it's still a blonde topless woman.
You're right. Absolutely.
It's just nudity in a movie.
Yeah, it is true.
But I also wonder whether there's a sense of like we're surrounding him with sort of these temptations, but kind of what you were saying, he only has eyes for Holly, he only looks at Holly, although we can dig into that some more. But that whole thing with his relationship is really interesting. And then just to get us to the next thing, which I think is a real masterclass in screenwriting, is the scene with Argyle.
That's great.
Yeah, that's so
in
good.
The front seat of the limo. This is a great way to get exposition out, because exposition scenes are always so tough, and how do you get the information to the audience that they need without being clunky about it? And so always what I tell my students is you've got to find a way to embed conflict into a scene of exposition. And so with Argyle and McClane, you've got McClane who doesn't want to talk about his marriage, and then you've got Argyle who's incredibly smart when it comes to people, right? And he just immediately, like, he's just picking up everything, right? Is like he's just putting two and two together constantly, and just sort of, and then going straight for it, right?
Yeah.
And then you see sort of McClane's appreciation, right?
Yeah.
Like he's growing to like Argyle, even though Argyle is digging into stuff they didn't want to talk about. Argyle's just so smart about it that he can't help but admire this guy. But yeah, you've got a character who doesn't want to talk and then is being forced to talk, and he's forced to tell us the things that we need to know about his marriage and about the situation, right? So it's a great
at the same time,
scene.
And I agree, because at the same time, he doesn't have to say the most pointed parts of that, which you would feel weird to hear John McClane
Argyle just
voice that
out. right.
But even to hear John McClane be that vulnerable wouldn't feel real, right? To say everything Argyle says. So they do a great way of giving someone else the ability to voice things that a character like John McClane wouldn't do naturally, right? And I think that's a great part of it, is that they found a way to put it in someone else's mouth without it feeling stupid or forced or anything.
And not even that, but even to expose him. So one of Argyle's last lines is like, he says, "You mean you thought she wouldn't make it out here and she'd come calling back, so why bother to pack?" Right. So
I love that.
I mean, it's not even just he's done a little psychoanalysis on McClane as well. And instead of feeling, like you said, like it's forced or like the movie is telling us, you see McClane kind of almost like, "Oh, you caught me," kind of, the sheepish grin. Yeah. And then we're like, okay, and it's just so clever.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's great.
And it makes him, it's kind of a very, it's a selfish thing. We might say it's selfish thing for McClane to think that in a relationship, and it makes him not perfect. It makes him someone who can make mistakes. And you're right. Everything you just said, I agree with. And I love the fact that he just, him agreeing with it and like, yep, you're right. Like, he's just like, you son of a bitch, like you did it, you figured it out. I love it. I think it's greght. I think you're right. Right on the nose there. Yeah. It's great stuff.
Yeah. And that keeps happening, because then once McClane gets to Nakatomi Plaza and he finally gets alone with Holly and he can't help himself, right? And he gets into the fight with her about using her maiden name.
Right.
And it's not until after she has to leave, her secretary comes and pulls her out. And then he's like, you're such an idiot, you know, like, why did you have to say that? Why did you have to do that? And I'm sure I'll remember it as we go through. It happens again later. He can't ever say any of these things or admit them to Holly, but he's always sort of understanding them and acknowledging them on his own, which I think is interesting, you know, because it fits his character that he has a hard time, especially in the 80s. You know, he's kind of a masculine guy who has a hard time talking about his feelings. And so whenever he's in a situation with her, he can't quite do it, but he admits to Argyle, he admits to himself. I think maybe when he's talking to Al, he says a little something too. And again, it's another point where he can talk to everyone else, but he can't ever talk to Holly. The sad part is, and the one thing I don't like just a little bit, and maybe it's an 80s movie, is he never does. You know, at the end of the movie, there really isn't that admitting that he was wrong. And in fact, as we'll get into, there's more a sense of Holly being wrong than John being wrong, at least plot wise, you know, which is, you know, maybe a small criticism of the movie, but the fact that he doesn't talk about it is not a criticism, because I think that fits his character really well.
There is like at the end of the movie, almost like a white knight syndrome where he comes save me, and she's like just infatuated with him at the end. She's looking at him even as he's just saying simple things to Al at the very end of the movie. You just look at her face and she's just like, oh my God, I love him. So, you know, he's so hot, kind of thing, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Basically means if you get in a fight with your girlfriend, but you save her from terrorists, you don't have to talk about the fight afterwards. Right. Like that's the lesson.
Yeah.
But it definitely did feel like that a little bit. Like, I think the modern viewer in me was still kind of waiting for something to be acknowledged. Like,
one thing to the franchise is that they don't ever patch things up. I mean, like, it's a continuing thing throughout the franchise that it doesn't get resolved in a happy way.
But they didn't have that plan with the first movie because they weren't playing.
I agree with you. You're right. I'm just saying, like, in the second movie, they're on the fritz again.
Yeah,
sure. The third movie, she's not.
And they deserve credit for that. I agree, because at the end of the first one, it does feel like a happily ever after. And then once they got to make more movies, I think then they realized, hey, you know, we need to be a little more realistic with this. And I agree. That's one of the things I like about some of the later movies is that. Yeah.
Spoilers, the whole like thing for him in 3 is just him picking up a phone to call her. That's kind of like his last action in the third movie is just make that phone call, you know. So
but then it doesn't help, and they don't get back together in 4.
No. We don't actually no, it doesn't. But anyway,
Shall we move to Act 2?
Yes. And we touched on it a little bit, I think, which is good. We talked about he's still trying to get help, mainly through like first the fire department and pulling the fire alarm, which then alerts people to his presence, which then people will attack him, and then he gets to send that fun elevator thing, and then to the police, obviously, as well. I agree. I had that act ending with Sergeant Powell getting shot at finally and back. Car backing off the embankment and calling for backup, and then John has succeeded at his goal of getting help.
Welcome to the party, pal. So that's
and I thought this act was really good of just kind of layering, like it got into the it's just good conflict motivation. Just one thing happens, which motivates the next thing, and it kind of gets into a really good, which I think is typical. Like it feels like a kind of an 80s action movie groove of plot, of just it's kind of like doing its thing and things that it just felt very normal. But that wasn't, not to say that it was uninteresting. I thought it was done well, and I enjoyed it through. I never felt like the plot was pulled out of somewhere. I feel like it always felt logical and flow was good, and I was kept engaged by it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, if I was going to be slightly critical of that second act, I feel like Holly does kind of disappear quite a bit. I'd have to go back and see exactly where she pops up. but she really kind of disappears when the elevator opens. Yeah. And we see the body, then we get her reaction, and she's like, "Oh, John's alive," and we get, I think Ellis's negative reaction to what he's up to, and she does come back later in Act 3, after she's the one who goes and starts negotiating with Hans, but it would have been nice to see her maybe one more time, but otherwise, I completely agree. I think the action, kind of what he's doing as he moves around and gets information, and I'll say the one action, the shootouts, and
the fight that he has because of the I guess it's the fire alarm when the guy initially comes up and he in the first battle, that when the rolling down the stairs, some of that I was like, okay, this feels a little bit like a little aged action for me. I didn't completely think it was that cool of fight by the end of it, but that was the only one that I thought.
There's something, the difference between like, here's Donovan to the defense of the movie. There's something about like John Wick action where the camera is doing these intricate things, and the actors are doing these like ballet dances, essentially. There's something about that, and then to me, there's something also about like just a street fight where it's more raw and it's more like, it's not as choreographed feeling. And I love that about the movie. I love just it just feels like, it feels rough almost, it has a little bit of extra, to me, authenticity to it than like John Wick does. And I love John Wick for its own reasons.
No, I mean, in that way it feels, but I guess it feels a little bit like, specifically once they got to the stairs, it just started feeling a little cheesy to me for some reason.
Gotcha.
I don't maybe I probably have to reanalyze to really understand why. I think it's kind of like those wide shots where two characters are rolling with themselves down a set of stairs in a that violently like way, where it's just kind of like, okay. I mean, I feel like we could have maybe just shot this differently and maybe it would have been more interesting. I don't know. Maybe. It was a very minor moment of thinking.
Gotcha.
And honestly, the rest of the action, I didn't have never felt like.
I'm not trying to attack anyone's. If anyone has any criticism of the movie at all, I'm not, because I think it's all warranted for sure. I just think that it lends itself to that type of action movie. So
I guess I think the other
character, it fits his character.
It does. Yeah. I just think the other sequences they did it with worked way better than that one.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
But it's a pretty short, tight act. It's like 25 minutes. It does what it needs to do, and gets us, just about to the midpoint of the movie. And
it's very straightforward.
It's a big shift with the arrival of the cops, and then eventually the FBI. And
honestly, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just as a new viewer, not really knowing anything, I was honestly a little surprised he got. Like, I was expecting that to be a third act thing when they finally got there, like maybe in like fourth act thing, when he finally, like maybe like they were going to stop him again. Then he'd have to do a bunch of stuff on his own. Then he finally get the police. And so I was like, oh, I didn't expect them to get here that quick, though, the events of the third act obviously provide the further conflicts that them arriving provides.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, there's some good things that it piggybacks off what you said about, there's this old adage that, action movies have a ticking clock, and for the protagonist, but it's almost like the ticking clock is for the antagonist in this movie.
See, but I felt another ticking clock, and maybe we can, I mean, this is majority of Act 3. For me, the ticking clock for John was like how long it would take Hans to realize who Holly was. Because even in like the Ellis conversation, like for me, that's the whole time I'm thinking like Ellis is going to let Hans know. Like he's going to let something slip. Like that to me was what John was worried about in the Ellis scene, was like, not that Ellis would die, fuck Ellis, but it was like that Ellis would say something. And he's like, Ellis, what have you told them? And he's like, he's worried about Holly being found out because he knows if that happens, he's fucked.
And that's
to me, that's kind of like the ticking clock that it's like, it's in the back of his head and you don't, and it's like a ticking clock that at some point in the plot is going to explode kind of thing. At some point, Hans is going to figure out who Holly is. Is Molly or Holly?
Holly.
It's Holly. Okay.
I agree with you. I think that, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's something that they kind of verbalize every now and then. Like we want the FBI to show up, or it's part of the plan. So it's like they have this structure and time and like how things should be ordered out. And so like, since they're vocalizing it, I think it's why to me, it's maybe more prevalent. And it's something that yeah, it's something obviously from like a moviegoer. We anticipate Holly going to be involved at some point, but it's nothing that he's like just vocalizing like they are vocalizing. You know, that's
but also because he can't.
Yeah.
That's kind of because he can't. Because if he says anything, it defeats the purpose.
Well, but it's not just that. I agree with you, Daniel, about the thing with Holly, and I think that's a really great thing that they put into Act 3 to give that a little bit more.
Because to me, that made that scene with Ellis so
intense. Yeah.
I was like,
it's great. It's great.
But I agree with Donovan in the sense that McClane doesn't really have strong goals. That is, a lot of times, like we said, in Act 2, his goal is to get help. We'll talk about what the Act 3 goal is in a minute, but we already referenced the fact that in Act 3, Al tells him to hunker down and hide out, and for large chunks of the act he does that, and part of it is because he never brings the fight to them, right? He actually never really does that. When they come up to where he is, he fights with them, but it's generally him hiding out and then them coming up, and so he never really has a plan, right? It's not like he creates strong goals that he follows through on. He has sort of a broader goal, and then he has to react to what they do. Whereas, as Donovan pointed out, they have to get the code from Nakagi, and then they have to get the vaults open, and then they have to get the police there. Then they have to get the FBI there. Then they have to get the FBI to cut the power. Then they have to get the FBI to send the helicopters so they can blow the roof. And, even in movies that we've analyzed before, like The Dark Knight, where we talked about how the Joker had such a plan, even still, Bruce Wayne, Batman also has a plan, right? And sometimes he's behind and he doesn't always know what's happening, but he's always very action oriented with goals and plans moving forward. Here, McClane isn't really like that, right? I mean, he doesn't have the same sort of forward momentum. It's kind of Gruber and the terrorists that propel things forward most of the time, and then McClane reacts to that in a way that obviously is constantly infuriating them.
And I almost wonder if that works better for an everyday man protagonist,
for sure,
right? Because if he had a plan the whole time, it wouldn't feel as real. Like the suspense and the tension is like both from like wondering what's going to happen next and how's John going to just handle it on the fly, right? Like that's kind of the tension of his character. And also I think it's kind of the swap of like, typically, at least in a lot of plots, and maybe it's more horror, it's like the protagonist or the one with the plan trying to keep everything under control and move from point A to point B. And it's the antagonists that are like hiding in the dark, or you don't want to go outside of the camp because they'll get, it's like, so John's kind of like this horror movie monster in some ways too. He is antagonists, right? Like he kind of is this like hiding in the dark, killing people from anywhere they know about. But that also, I feel like that gives it a sense of like fun, or just like, what's going to happen next? I don't even know what it's instead of like, oh no, what's the monster going to do next it's more like, oh man, what's the protagonist going to do next? What's he going to come up with?
It's a really great comparison to North by Northwest, which I mentioned earlier, which is also a everyman situation, right? So in North by Northwest, Roger Thornhill, played by Cary Grant, is, these bad guys think that he's, the spy or whatever that they are then going after. And so, he, like McClane, is constantly reacting to the things that are happening to him. The difference is, and I think it's a really interesting difference, especially, for writers and directors, is that North by Northwest is almost exclusively aligned with Roger Thornhill. That is, there's only one or two times where we leave him and discover information that he doesn't know. Most of the time we're with him and we're discovering things as he discovers them, right?
Yeah.
Die Hard is the opposite, right? So Die Hard, rather than being aligned only with Thornhill, is constantly moving between characters, right? You call this range of information. So we move, we know about the terrorists showing up 10 minutes before any of the characters do, any of the McClane or Holly or anyone else. And so we know the plan, right? We always know what the bad guys are doing. And most of the time we have more information than McClane does.
Except for kind of the ultimate goal, right? Because that's something we're always like, but what are they ultimately trying to do? Because that's something we really don't figure out till John figures out.
I think we still know that they're there for the money. I mean, I think we get information about that sooner than the other characters. We don't know fully about the blowing of even then we do know about the blowing of the roof, right? I mean, Hans basically tells us exactly what the plan is before McClane finds explosives up in the roof, right? So he's always behind where we are in terms of information.
That's true. I guess it just, and maybe that's a little more of a critique from me, is feeling like it's a lot of work and like a lot of intricacies for just some money. I don't know. Like, it almost felt like it was such an elaborate plan. I was kind of always waiting for them to have a bigger thing to pull out of, like, oh, but here's what we're really doing here. Kind of like,
I mean, it's $640 million.
Well, two things.
It is.
Well, two things here.
But it's a lot of Europeans. Why'd you have to get so many Europeans to get the money? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's cheaper labor around here.
That's another thing, though, I think that works to what I said earlier about the charm of the villains, is that they're not, he even says, he like laughs about it. We're not terrorists, and they're just thieves. And I think it's something about the charm of those kind of villains. They're not out for world domination. They're not out for, X, Y, and Z. They're there for something that everybody wants, is being wealthy.
And I think the other stuff they did around it kind of confused me, I guess, of like them, like, oh, well, he was an ex-US. What was he from? Was he He was like East Germany, from the whatever Soviets side of Germany and things like that it felt like they were trying to, like, outside of things, like when they went to like the news plot line, when they would go to the news studio, minor plot.
I think that was there just to kind of, A, he had this backstory, and B, he was using his backstory to basically throw everybody off. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, that
makes sense.
Yeah.
And to me, I'll just give one quick last thing on Daniel's point. He's got all these criminals, and I think part of the thing is he's got, the brothers obviously go, they're the muscle and they're a little hot-headed or whatever. But I think part of the point is he's got this crew of professionals that he absolutely trusts to get the job done. And I think part of what we see with Hans is, and there is this, especially 80s, European versus American. Yeah. You're talking about how elaborate it all seems. I don't think it's elaborate to him. He just thinks he's so smart that he doesn't even seem all that stressed about any of this. It's like those dumb Americans, this plan is obviously foolproof because Americans are idiots and I'm this smart German guy and I'm just going to put together this awesome group of people. And it may seem complicated, but I'm super smart and I don't care, and it's going to be fine. And maybe it is part of the charm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was saying two things. One, they really lean into that aspect because they keep giving John McClane this affection for cowboys, and it lines up with him like, you dumb cowboy, which is a fucking incredible thing. The other thing is to kind of go back a little bit. Another ticking clock that I think is super important to the movie is that we haven't really said yet is the ticking clock of John's body failing. Like, he is like, how much longer can he last? Which kind of attributes to Act 3 a little bit, because he's getting this break. So I think that's something too, is like, again, it adds to everyman thing, is like, this is a person that when you shoot him, he bleeds. He's got glass in his feet. He actually opens up in the third act about Holly and all these kind of things. And I just,
no, those are good points. I think it is like, Rickman does feel like a Bond villain to me. And so I kept kind of waiting for a Bond villain-esque kind of grandiose plan, which I'm not necessarily upset that they didn't do. I will say that I feel like the killings, like even of Mr. Takagi, felt a little like, if you're just thieves and you already had a plan for getting the money anyway, did you just not like him? I guess.
But it seemed like that was
a
an
show
easy
of power.
Two things. I think it like we said earlier, it's a movie thing to make the stakes raised higher for McClane, and two, they kind of said it in that scene is like those two guys in the background are making a bet, like they already kind of probably know how it's going to play out, but hey, if you have a key to the door and it might open it, let's try it. It may not work, it may not work. So it seems like a very natural thing, and it paints their character even more. And again, ultimately, I think it was there just to kind of raise the stakes because, Tagaki, he's a likable guy. He's got a connection to Holly and all these kind of things. He's like a representation of Nakatomi itself. And I think it's just a good story beat.
But Daniel's right. They don't have to shoot him.
No, they don't.
And I guess I just kept wondering, like, is this going to connect to some, like, because Takagi, it was like, okay, he's the head of this company. They're robbing him. So is he like involved? Like, and there was even some dialogue that was like, I was a little, and it was a little confusing for me when they were talking about like what the company did, or like
and he's not the head of the company. He's the head of the American part of the company. Sure. But that's what he's saying.
But he represents
the German and Japan because I don't know this information, which obviously he's lying. But yeah.
Anyway, I agree with you. I'm actually glad they aren't mustache twirling. Let's blow up the world. Like that is better, especially when it's an everyday man going to save the day. But some of the things they do still felt a little Bondy villain to me.
And I think like Takagi getting his head blown off, part of that is kind of like the women being topless. It's an 80s action movie, and you're kind of leaning into some of the things that are, but honestly, all things considered, it's pretty for the time period, it's pretty conservative compared to other movies happening around it, actually. So.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting that he later on says, since I've moved from whatever stealing to kidnapping, you left out murder, right? Did you forget about the murder?
Right.
I didn't catch that. That's super funny.
Well, let's get to the point, or I guess the goal of Act 3, right? Because that's something we talked about, wanted to figure out. So what did you guys have for the goal of Act 3?
Let me look here. Bruce, go on. I'm pulling up my notes again.
Well, Act 3 is a less defined goal, and I think it does play into what everything we've talked about in terms of McClane being a reactive character. I'd say that there's kind of two goals, although they're really the same thing, because he has a goal that he doesn't realize he has, right? That the act is built around, and that's the detonators. He actually gets the detonators. Right at the end of Act 2, start of Act 3, but he doesn't know what they're for, because he even says later, like, he thought he'd already seen all the explosives, so he doesn't know what they're for. So he doesn't really have a goal with the detonators, except for
not to let them
ends when he loses the detonators, right? When he has the big, climactic scene and all that stuff, and he loses the detonators. But he also tells us when he's talking to when he calls Hans on the headset or whatever, the walkie-talkie, he says, "I'm the fly in the ointment," right? So I'd say there's kind of two goals for him. The goal is to be the fly in the ointment, and it's a little broad, and that just allows him to hide out when he needs to hide out, do things when he needs to do them, and it's just, he's there to kind of mess things up whenever he has the opportunity to do it. But then, how do you climax being the fly in the ointment, right? Well, it climaxes when he loses the bag, in the big shootout with the glass and, the bare feet and all that kind of stuff.
No, right. My actual goal was just to stall until the police, because they're already there, until help helps. Almost basically help is there, but it's not helping yet. But basically to just stall, do anything he can to prevent Hans from progressing his plan until the help ends up helping, which then is obviously not letting him get the detonators, and even just hiding himself, knowing that Hans wants to find him, is him doing that, right? But then obviously that fails when he can no longer stall them, and when help is not any help. It's kind of a double failure, right? Like both parts of the plan end up falling through.
Yeah, I would say probably the moment this all clicks together, the end of Act 3 was probably when Hans and McClane meet, right? That's probably
I mean, that's the highlight of the act.
Precursor to the climax. That happens right before
the
big shootout. Yeah.
And Hans's fake accent, I kept being like, it kept making like, I was like, I just want to repeat everything he says because it's almost like breaking my brain trying to listen to it, trying to find the accent or something. It was.
I do love that he calls him out on it. Your fucking fake American accent. I think it's great.
Yeah. And I also, I mean, it never felt like John ever. I totally did never believe John trusted him. Even they tried to do that like fake like throwaway to like the shot of the elevator name. Like Clay, because he gave us that fake name, and it's like, oh, John's checking to see if the guy's name is on the elevator to know if he can trust him, which doesn't make sense anyway. Because
I've always been kind of confused by that.
Could have just said it, or if his name wasn't on it, not everybody that works in the building's name's on the elevator. You know what I mean? So, but
I agree.
But it is a bit of a red herring. I mean, he gives the name. The name is on the board. So we think that McClane has bought into it, and then he gives him the gun, right? So,
but it's also
gives us that little moment of thinking that it's going to go bad for John.
Sure.
Yeah. There's some in this act, of course. There's some great stuff with Powell. This is where we kind of learn all about Powell and why he's a beat cop now, or not a beat cop, but why he hasn't done more, why he doesn't pull his gun on people, and all these other kind of things. And there's just some great bonding happening between them in this act. It's great stuff.
Well, they do a good job of utilizing sitting around and waiting, because that's basically what John's doing, but they find a way to really use it for good character development and really to just kind of create Powell into a real character for the first. Other than that, he's just been like a donut eating cop. Like, it's kind of been a bit of a bumblebee. Like he's not been shown to necessarily have it all together or even be a reliable character even. He's got the donut thing, and then he goes in the building and backs out, and it's a little bit ridiculous. Not to make him look like an idiot, but he doesn't look like, he's not necessarily he's no John McClane.
Yeah, I can see that a little bit, but also I think he kind of stands up to his superior officer. He tells him, what I'm saying? There's a lot there.
There's not, but up to this point, there's not much, basically.
Right.
Once the help gets there, that's when the superior officer is there. Then you start getting that dynamic. But and we've touched on that already.
It also feels like another thing in this act, we kind of setting up the almost like Holly's antagonist is the news, even though she really maybe, he does, because she's watching the news. Yeah, that's what happens. Okay, so it's kind of setting up a secondary antagonist for her.
The whole news arc felt a little forced for me. The whole the one anchor that keeps fucking up and saying oh yeah, Helsinki something, and he's like, oh no, sweet, and he's like, he's sitting over there trying to hold it. He's the emoji with the smiley face over the crying face kind of thing. And it just every time I went there, I was just like, why are we here? It just kind of felt a little bit I even understood where they were going with it, of oh yeah, this is gonna be how the terrorists figure out John McClane and or Holly, whatever. But it kind of, I was like, this just feels like a weird, let's introduce this news anchor who's insecure, and this reporter who's sleazy, to kind of be there just for Holly to slap in the end.
There's one thing here, and granted, maybe it's hindsight 2020, but there's a theme that happens throughout the whole franchise, and it started with this movie, is that there's two things. The news and news reporting is bad, and then also the government, and specifically the FBI, are just not intelligent people.
It's very specifically cops.
Yeah, it happens throughout the whole franchise.
Parts of government. Yeah,
and even the news guys in the second one. Granted, that all that stems from this movie and what things either liked about it, and so they kept running with it. But it feels like there's something, the writers had something to say, or there was something in their head that they don't like FBI. Something like that's happening. So the Johnson and Johnson are just, that's a running gag throughout the whole franchise. Johnson and Johnson are just fucking idiots, So
well,
it's interesting.
Yeah, and just obviously it does. That's exactly it. It feels like someone just wanted to make news people look idiotic, or like these guys don't help anything. They just make everything worse, and they do a good job of making them look like that. I mean,
yeah, but I mean, in defense, you said the pro cop, they make the captain look like a bumbling idiot. The only good cop is
pro
Powell.
beat cop. They pro you know, like everyday cop, not like once you're in a suit and tie, you know, fuck you, you're a part of the system.
Yeah.
Although the captain looks good compared to the FBI, interestingly, like he is smart enough to know that the FBI guys are idiots.
Well, at least Bruce Willis can make him shut up.
Yeah.
There's another one of those things where you're like, he tells him like, you know, shut the fuck up.
Just
like
he's handing the microphone.
Okay, yeah.
I love it.
A couple other thoughts about Thornburg. One, he does show up right at the start of Act 3. I mean, that is literally what we cut to after Powell has called for assistance. We cut to Thornburg. And of course, it's not just that Holly can slap him at the end. It's how, I mean, she slaps him because that's how Hans finds out, right? That.
But that also felt like a little bit
married.
Like he's a reporter doing what reporters do, I guess, a little bit. Like it. Yeah. Like it's like.
Yeah, but I mean, granted, I don't know if he would, as a human, would know in the moment reporting that the kids or, but I don't know. I mean, you're exploiting someone's family for ratings is what you're doing.
Right.
And I don't know.
Because the only reason he's doing that is to put the kids on TV. It's not like he's getting important journalistic information.
I guess the putting the kids on TV part is obviously, that's the part.
Yeah, but the kids don't know anything about it. And of course that inadvertently makes Hans and them find out who Holly is. Right. So
I also think the other important thing is that it opens the movie up, right? You know, because as much as we think about the movie as like, this is taking place inside a building. The second half of the movie is actually pretty expansive, right? I mean, we've got the cops outside, the FBI outside. We go to Thornburg and we're seeing him different places. And it also opens up the movie by raising the stakes. That is, now it's on the TV, you know, everybody's learning about it. It's becoming kind of this, you know, and we actually see that a lot more in more contemporary movies where people are watching the TV on the bar at the bar, and you know everyone's hooked to this story, and it's part of what kind of hooks us into it. And so I think that's some of what's going on as well.
It is interesting if you look at the first half and the second half, how wildly different they are. Like in terms of just characters involved, scope. It's something that is very cool and very interesting.
No, I remember feeling like, especially like I think it's the beginning of third act when there's kind of that montage of like police deployment when they're all like getting set in their locations, and then obviously like it's like there's a very big difference between John McClane with the Zippo in the vent, and then when this like police tank is trying to roll up to the side and they're shooting it with bazookas. I was like, well, okay, things got real. It was kind of that like moment of escalation has officially taken place.
And it is interesting because, as we pointed out before, like a lot of stuff happens away from McClane, you know, with Thornburg, with the FBI, with the attempts to storm the building with the SWAT team initially. And then, of course, we're still going back to Hans. And then we've got everything with Ellis happening in that act as well. But I don't ever think we feel like McClane is missing from the story, you know. And so they do a really nice job of really balancing and moving back and forth between a large number of characters, but never feeling like we've kind of lost track of McClane or wonder what's going on with him, right? I mean,
well, they do a good job of
cutting grounded with him, you know.
No, right. Sorry to cut you off. They do a good job of just jumping back to him to get commentary. Be like, "Go, guys, what are you doing? Don't do that!" Like that kind of stuff. That for one separates him from them. Now we know like McClane's better than them. They're not in this part of the same group. But also you're right. You just gets him involved in it. But I think it also like, it helps us understand that they're doing like, cause we're just seeing SWAT enter a building and things like that. We're like, as viewers, it's kind of neutral, but when he comes over, you're like, oh wait, I guess they're doing it wrong or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, it was good.
Well, I think it counters, and this goes back to points we've made before, that this isn't just a huge action movie. Every 10 minutes, we got to have a giant action sequence, right? I mean, the kinds of ways in which we create, or they create drama through Act 3, you know, I mean, the stuff with Ellis, you know, is highly dramatic, and it's just all talking on walkie-talkies, you know. The stuff with Hans, right, and whether he's going to figure out who Hans is, and again, that's a place where we have information that he does not, right? The SWAT team coming in is just everyone looking on horrified as this horrible thing is happening. And then again, we do mix in a couple of action scenes then within that, and especially the climax, you know, with the famous shooting of the glass and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of ways that Act 3 creates drama without having to just be constant action, right? Yeah. And I believe it's, I guess it's right at the beginning of Act 4, actually, that we have the pretty emotional, and by the way, John is missing from a lot of the beginning of Act 4 also.
Yeah.
He spends most of that time on the radio with Al, telling him all the stuff to tell Holly, right, in case he doesn't make it. There's if I remember correctly, like the beginning of Act 4, he's talking about that stuff. We cut away for like 7 or 8 minutes to other action. When we come back to McClane, I think he's still having the same conversation. And yet overall, again, it works because the things that we're cutting away to are interesting. And then when we come back to McClane, like, oh yeah, we got to know what's going on with McClane, right?
And we're also, I think it works too, because we're popping out to set up the things that John's about to have to deal with, right? Yeah. So we're just it's kind of working because we're setting up. It's like the beginning of the fourth act, really just setting up the rest of it in terms of like, here's the obstacle course. Here's what the bad guys are going to be trying to do. And now here's everything that's up against our hero one last time, kind of thing. No, I think it worked as well.
Also have to mention there's a line, I can't quite remember what it's in response to, when McClane earlier in the middle of Act 3 says, glass, who gives a shit about glass?
It's when he drops the bomb.
Right, which is a great foreshadowing then of yes, you should care about glass, right?
I did not even pick that up. That's great.
There's some one of my favorite things.
He's talking to the sergeant guy, and he's like, I've got glass all over my guys, right. And he's like,
glass.
Yeah, that's great though. I didn't pick up.
There's a lot of great things. Like that's one thing I love. Even in the feature that I wrote in class, I really tried to like foreshadow things or tie things back into the end, because I get that from these kind of movies, because I love, like, the best things is like, check out the Rolex, I'll check it out later, you know, and it's all leading up to the end, you know, so like all that kind of stuff I think is just maybe it's too on the nose.
About the Rolex, because that's a really important thing. Back to the Holly thing with
And maybe you're right. And maybe it's too on the nose, but I love that kind of stuff. I personally love it.
I don't think it's on the nose.
It's just smart. It's just smart. Yeah. And I'll be honest though, I did not like when they started shooting the glass. I was like, what the fuck are they doing? Until like that shot with John, and he's like, oh no, and he like looks down and he like sees the glass leading to the exit, and I was like, oh yeah, he's barefoot. Fuck, okay. I was a little slow there.
At least one other time earlier in the movie, he has jumped through or maybe it's later when he swings down, you know, with the fire hose off the top of the building. He smashes through a plane of glass. He's already stepped in glass, smashes that window, and then just rolls through the glass and is perfectly fine. But I mean, it's fine, but you know,
it's glass is only an obstacle when they want it to be.
That's true. That's true. That's very true. That's right. I guess we can probably go into Act 4. Is there anything that we're kind of missing other than?
No, we're there.
Yeah, we know one thing to kind of keep track of, which I'll bring up in Act 4, is Argyle's kind of having his small little arc. He's this guy who is not paying attention, and the bad guys are literally driving behind him,
dancing and singing. It's
and then he's going to get his moment later, but there's one person.
He does come in Act 3. Not that he really does anything, but he sees. That's another thing for Thornburg. He sees the news on the TV in the limo, and then realizes he's in the middle of this whole thing, and he tries to leave, and he realizes he can't, and so that he's just got to stay there. the movie is really clever, and this is definitely something from 80s movies that I think you see a little less of, that the care that every character that gets any kind of development, we come back to. Even something as small as Holly's secretary is the one who's pregnant, who needs a couch, that then justifies Holly's nice little moment, which also happens in Act 3, by the way, where she goes and negotiates with Hans, and he's super impressed when he's like, who put you in charge? And she's like, you did when you shot my boss.
It was great.
And then she's just like all matter of fact with him, but it's her secretary who we met at the beginning who comes in and interrupts the moment to get, and so even just like bringing her back, not that she has a goal or does anything heroic in the way that Argyle and Powell do, but it's just careful screenwriting that, this is a range of characters, and we're gonna come back to a lot of them, even to the point, obviously, of the brothers and the brother going after, McLean and all that kind of stuff.
I love praising this movie. I just want to say it. I love it.
No, I completely agree. It just feels so, and it feels very classic Hollywood in a good way. You know what I mean? Yeah. Where it's just like, there's no throwaway character. Like every character that we're going to spend more than a moment with is going to have an arc of some kind. You know what I mean? And that is cool. And I guess just watching a movie like this, I'm always expecting it too. Like I knew as soon as we see Argyle, he's going to have something fun to do at the end, but, and it pays that off really well. And it's really great, but it's just, I think that's part of the nostalgia I maybe was talking about at the beginning of this podcast about sitting down with one of these movies and just knowing that there's going to be very few seconds of wasted time while you're sitting here. There's going to be very few times where a scene doesn't need to be there. You know what I mean? Or a character is useless. And I guess even as a screenwriter and as a storyteller, it's just fun to see what ends up, if you look at it on paper, it's a simple story, but they create this very intricate web of characters and plot, and it just is all, like we said, tight, and it flows and it works, and it's just kind of that classical Hollywood, it just works great, and it's just a great time, and you leave very satisfied from a sit down. Sorry.
No, it's great.
Act 4.
Is there something that we need to touch upon with Holly at all? Kind of like, or is that something we can talk more about overall and after Act 4?
I think Act 4 we can get to kind of the main stuff that happens with Holly.
Cool. So definitely Act 4 kind of begins. They set the power off, unlock the locks, and then we're gonna blow the building and all that good stuff. So it's kind of like, that's to me the beginning of Act 4 is shutting the power off. Of course, Christmas miracle, as they always say, and it kind of starts the end game here, so to speak. Yeah.
Also, it was funny because the whole scene when they're talking to the electrician guy about it, and he's
I got it right here. It's literally on my screen right now.
Yeah, and he's like, no, I can just turn this one building off. They're like, no, turn the grid off. He's like, but I can just do the one building. And like, no, turn the grid off. And he just turns the grid off, and you're like, was no one listening when he kept saying that? Like, no one listened to it. Not his coworker, not the bad guy. I was just like, did we just decide to ignore that this guy could have done it better?
Yeah, I know. It
was great. It was funny. I liked it.
It just paints that, I don't know, there's a constant theme of there's a lot of really smart, or few smart people and a lot of dumb people. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a theme of like the dumbest people being in charge, kind of.
In charge,
yes.
Absolutely. With the exception of, interestingly, of course, of Hans, who's very smart and in control. And maybe there is a quote unquote conservativeness to this. I mean, he's a terrorist, but then the other one is Nakagi,
right.
Who is not really a fool, even though he dies early. I think he doesn't crack. He gets the respect of McLean. I mean, he's a small part, but he's an interesting part, and he's a business guy, right?
Yeah.
Hans also, in the end, is kind of a businessman. So it's interesting that the businessmen and the cops, the lower level cops, are smart, but the bureaucrats, the government officials are all idiots.
No,
right?
it definitely felt kind of that, like, it felt Reagan-y, almost like a Reagan era film where it's just like, it's a very pro-capitalism film,
right?
And a very anti-government regulation film.
Right.
But it also just feels normal, even for like 90s era films too, where it's just
sure, yeah.
Well, one thing to kind of piggyback off that is right there is we didn't really talk about Ellis and his death scene.
Yeah.
And the one guy who does coke dies. I mean, this is like
that we
during a
know
Reagan.
Of. Everyone does
Sure.
coke.
Sure, but like, it's a very, if you're like you're saying pro-Reagan era, and it's very
anti-drug.
Yeah.
And he
And
literally does it before he walks into the room. Like he does it to like for courage. He's like, all right, I'm gonna go in there. That's fun.
I do love one script change that was in the script was he mentions like, oh, I could tell you're from doing business in Bolivia because you're international affairs or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
I like it better where he's like, you missed some. It's so much simpler.
Yes, I noticed that change too. It's a nice script change. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very much. It's succinct and just it says it all.
Yeah.
So,
I really enjoyed Hans toying with him too. It was a very fun.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah. Ellis is a fucking idiot. Yeah.
No, that's a great scene. It's also really well shot because
it is.
We get these shots earlier in the scene. He's all cool and he's shot in kind of this neutral way and all this sort of stuff. And he gets his coke, but then he waves. This is not going to go the way you think. And then it cuts to this shot, but because it's cutting back and forth, it's less noticeable. The camera's actually gone below. And normally, of course, the association is low angle means the guy is powerful. The camera's below him, and he's kind of bent over like this, and his hair suddenly is on his forehead. And suddenly just everything is like, oh my God, he's so desperate. Like he has now understood the situation and the angle and the angle of his body and the way his hair is. It was all perfect, to show that desperation of like, oh shit, I may not get out of this. What have I done?
For me, when I watched it, I never completely believed he fully understood the danger. Like even at the end where he's like, yeah, he like gives him try again next time or something. I don't know.
When he says John, when he goes John, and like he's just like
that's
that
true.
Look on
that's
him.
True.
He's sweating, dude. He's sweating.
I think it's the last two shots. Maybe it's three, but the last 2 or 3, they've got that lower angle. He fills the frame more. Earlier on, he's further back. He's more in a medium shot. He goes into like a close up because he's leaned towards the camera. He's down. His hair is in his forehead. And he's still trying, right? And he's still trying to maintain his slick coolness, but it's all falling apart. It's just, it's a really well done scene.
Yeah, it's great. Love it.
Yeah,
love it.
Back to Act 4. Yeah.
Act 4. All right. So of course now we gotta
the goal.
We gotta go kick some shit out of some bad guys.
Yeah, because is it at the beginning of Act 4 when he realizes the roof plan? John does?
Right.
Well, so it's interesting at the beginning of Act 4 because it does take him a while to develop this goal because at the beginning he's giving his whole whole speech to Powell. And by the way, the specific thing that he says, because I was talking about how he never can tell Holly the things he tells other people, he actually says to Al, tell Holly I'm sorry. I said I loved her 1,000 times, but I never once said I'm sorry. He still never says he's sorry, interestingly, right? He says it to Al, but then of course that's never communicated to
I think killing
there's also
a bunch of terrorists is the best apology you can get.
Yeah. But there's also the implication that he is progressed enough where he can say that, even though I do think it's super important that he does do it.
He should have said it, but I agree. The implication is that he's changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Even that line is implicated. Yeah.
But that takes up a good chunk of the beginning of Act 4. And then after that, I can't remember what sparks him. I think it's something someone says.
Over the radio?
Yeah, but then he's like, what are you up to? And he had asked that question earlier where he's like, what's going on? Why do you need the caps? And there was a point where he had seen some of the work, but then he didn't get to follow up on it. And so then there's that moment. He's like, Hans, what are you up to? And so that really starts kind of what seems to be the Act 4 goal. And again, it's not super direct. It's like, he's trying to figure out the plan. And now he's becoming a little more proactive, right? Because figuring out the plan means that he's also trying to stop the plan, right?
Yeah, when he's totally given up on outside help. too.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think the Act 4 goal is like stop the plan, right? So now he's going to try to stop the plan. Although again, he's doing it smartly. He doesn't actually just try to go after Hans, and as we'll see, he gets caught, right? I mean, he doesn't go after them; they come after him, and they outman him, right?
They actually
it's interesting,
first, right? Saves all the people off the roof because he figures out the plan.
Yeah.
It is. I'm looking at the script again, and I'm right now. I'm on page 99 out of 115, and he's still talking to Al. you know, like there's only in the script page. There's only 15 left. I guess I didn't realize that, but like it's so interesting. Like all this stuff is happening, and he's still going. Yeah, and it's wild.
Yeah, I mean, I guess then it almost feels like the act doesn't really start until after that conversation. I mean, I know it's kind of like
relatively short, honestly. I mean, there's a lot going on, but he gets the people off like the stuff on the roof is the big action set piece of the final act, right?
Right.
And the FBI is flying in and they're shooting at him on the roof because he has shot over everyone's head to scare them into running back off the roof. And then he swings into the office, right? And then I guess he gets captured. Right after that, all happens really quickly, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, he runs. McClane runs into Klaus at around the same time. The kids are being on the TV.
And he thinks he kills him. Yes, right.
Yeah. And there is a line in the script that it's a good thing it got cut because it was definitely wouldn't play well today.
I remember the line.
I mean, I'm just going to say it. When he's they're fixing to fight him, and it's Carl, Klaus's brother, right. And he says they're fixing to put down their guns, or they lose their guns or something. They're sizing each other up, and he says, "Better this way, isn't it? I mean, any faggot can shoot a gun." Yeah, and that's not in the movie. That's not in the movie.
This movie would not be remembered like it is probably.
Yeah, that's yeah.
And that's a really interesting line because there is very much in a lot of 80s movies, where they even call them Euro trash at one point, but there's sort of this sense of European men as effeminate, as
they even had them
pseudo gay. The clothes they have long hair,
tight pants. I noticed that Klaus had these skin tight pants.
Right. Yeah.
He was like wearing skinny jeans. It was when I noticed that I couldn't stop noticing. I was like, what? This looks ridiculous now that I can tell he's got like leather pants
you see that
on.
A lot in 80s movies where there's this sort of effemination of European men in contrast to the more traditional masculinity of the American hero, right? And luckily we have left that far behind, I think. But I'm glad that they cut that line. That was way more than we needed.
But I remember growing up with that kind of portrayal of European, like that's kind of the portrayal of Europeans I was used to in movies and in TV shows, growing up, as far as from a Western media. So it feels very familiar, but I agree. It is very of the time and of the thing where you're like, it's very like, it's like Ron Swanson. Like if you remember Parks and Rec, he like hates Europe. It's like Ron Swanson was created based on people that lived in the 80s and only believed things that happened in like values of the 80s were created.
Right.
And anyway, it was, I noticed that as well. It's kind of funny in like, it's just kind of like funny in a ridiculous way in modern times of just thinking like, why did people think this was like what Europeans were or something? I don't know. It was funny.
Yeah. So after that scene, basically we go back to Johnson and Johnson. It's also weird because it timed out right now. The movie's happening as we're talking about it on my thing. So
perfect.
So Johnson and Johnson are fixing to go up to where they're fixing to blow the roof. And there's even they get their comeuppance, right? And there's that line about like, oh, we'll lose 25% of the people. I can live with that. Right. Oh, it's like Saigon, like he's from we used to fight in Vietnam or whatever. And it's it's very interesting because it's like we talking about, it's kind of a capitalist conservative kind of viewpoints on some of the socioeconomics that they're
talking about. But then it's kind of like, I guess, anti-Vietnam too in that way, or like it shows like, hey, the bad guys were soldiers in Vietnam and they did bad things over there.
It's a little weird because I don't even know that the 20 to 25% casualty has to do with the fact that he was in Vietnam, because the younger Johnson also is fine with those casualty figures. Yeah. And in fact, when the older Johnson says that line about Saigon, the younger Johnson, this is one of my least favorite lines in the movie, says, "I was in middle school, you dickhead." And it's such a weird line. It's not very funny.
No.
It sort of counters the fact that these two guys are supposed to be kind of douchey partners together, and then to have the one guy, I don't know, it just didn't fit. They just could have left that line out.
It also just felt like, who was asking where you were, bro? Like when you said, like he's like, yeah, I did this in Saigon. I was in middle school, dickhead. Okay. Thank you for, like, it's just like no one asked you where you were.
Yeah. To me, the numbers thing is not necessarily to do with Saigon and like, we're going to kill people, whatever. It's more about like, oh, they're FBI.
Yes.
It's a disregard for human life.
Yeah. Well, just like
a general disregard.
Not even that. It's just that like, these are, as FBI agent, you're going to go over tons of cases, and you're probably told if you do this thing, you're going to expect 20 to 25% of life to be lost. And it was like, he was, to me, reciting like his training. That's what what it's come off to me is like that. So
I read it's another anti-government bureaucratic, like, the FBI has decided that 25% casualty rate is perfectly acceptable. Right. And we're obviously supposed to go, no, 0% casualty rate is what's acceptable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Of course they blow the top of the roof. We get the classic John McClane jumping off, and then shooting through the glass, which is again happening right now. And great stuff all around. Good action. I think one thing that's cool is the use of miniatures with the helicopter going down the building. It's something that it looks so good, and that I think we lose a lot into modern films. Something I wish that we kind of continued, and you can't. It's hard, even with CGI. To me, it's just so hard to get it to come across as tangible and real. And I don't know, it's just something. It's magical when it happens.
I want to bring up a minor plot hole because I don't think it's a problem at all, and I think that sometimes people get lost in trying to figure out good plot holes versus bad plot holes. Mm-hmm. So at one point, we see where the FBI police line is. Right, it's sort of almost like a block or half a block down that road, right? They've got the barricades set up. They got all the cars. Presumably that's where the FBI agents are. And then we talk about the choppers, and suddenly Johnson & Johnson are on the helicopter, and they are flying down the streets of LA, having a grand old time, and he's yelling and he's having a great time. I mean, the helicopter seems to be flying a mile or two or more. And it's sort of like, how did the FBI agents get from their, the little place right by the building to on these helicopters flying from miles away? But it doesn't matter, right? Because the joke and the fun of it is worth it, right? Yeah. That these guys are on the helicopter, that he's leaning out the window, yelling about Saigon, and, they're like literally 50 feet above the street being completely irresponsible. It doesn't matter. And so that kind of small plot hole is exactly the kind of thing that it doesn't affect the plot, right? It doesn't affect what happens to the characters or how they get in or out of conflict. So to me, it's just a great example of where you can kind of cheat things, and it's worth it because it creates comedy or it creates a little extra drama in a way that we probably don't even notice, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. That's one thing I did notice was like those wide shots of like the camera going with the helicopters. And I didn't really thought about it too much, but there was something kind of back in my head going, shouldn't they already be there? Like, I don't know. Right. Like there was something.
These helicopters have flown from miles away, and it's not like they come land, they get on it and then fly the last quarter mile, like they're on them the entire
they cut the scene where they actually lift off and go like do a little sightseeing and then come back.
Right.
Actually, that could have worked. That could have worked.
I wonder if part of it too, though, is maybe just in the editing room, they have X amount of shots of helicopters going left to right or whatever, and they're trying to splice all together, and it just worked. I don't know. Maybe that was also a side effect of the in the editing room. Who knows?
There is a moment where it seems like they're kind of close, and then suddenly they're flying down this what seems to be a pretty long street, and they're having this whole conversation, and then at the end of that, they seem to fly a little bit more, and then they seem to like come around on the building, and it's like, okay, I don't know where these helicopters were, but again, it's a minor point.
But it doesn't, like you said, it just doesn't. You don't care because it's funny and you're in, and it's so quick too that you're moved on before you have time to care.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess we can kind of get into the nitty gritty of it all here. Is
finale,
the finale here with John confronting Gruber and the his other henchman, which I think he looks just like Huey Lewis. You know Huey Lewis?
Huey Lewis. Oh yeah.
God, he looks just like him. I've always thought they were brothers or something.
Yeah.
My whole
really
life.
Front desk,
Yeah, always. Yeah, that's the guy at the very end with Gruber. But you know, they have this this little, you know, cowboy western standoff, you know, which is great. And of course, we get a lot of payoffs with one-liners and payoffs with X, Y, and Z. One interesting thing, of course, is that in the script, he says, "I'm a cowboy," or "We are cowboys." And in the movie, he says, "Happy Trails, Hans," is after he shoots Gruber. And I think "Happy Trails, Hans" is much better. He's not only referencing being a cowboy, he's also he's literally sending Gruber on a journey out the fucking window. And like, to me, it just like that's a perfect one-liner where it's like an onion. It has layers, and like
it goes even further because "Happy Trails" is the song that Roy Rogers used to sing.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Like, that's a perfect one-liner, and when that kind of shit happens, I just get giddy. So
it's a perfect.
I love it.
I agree.
I love it, and it's interesting because everybody quotes "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker," but it's people always think that. If you talk about conversation,
what he says at the end, right?
Yeah,
right.
No, but he doesn't.
That's exactly what I was saying. Like when that line came, and I was like, "Holy shit!" We're like halfway through. I thought that would be like the final one.
Don't worry. Later, it becomes the thing. So,
is it in every movie after this?
Yes, and it is the thing he says.
That displeases me.
Yeah, hey, it's okay. It's actually I'm okay with it.
It would have been so much better if it was only used once, though.
It's still cool. Trust me.
Okay, I trust you.
Me.
You're right. I should,
Of course,
the one-liners.
Hans goes out the window, and then there's this struggle of him pulling Holly through. And of course, they unlatch the watch, which is a callback to Ellis, and also a callback to maybe LA is not. I don't know. To me, it's almost like symbolism, right? LA is representing in the Rolex, you know. So
it's not to me. It's not just LA though. It's the job, and this is it's super clever. But this is where I get a little frustrated because the movie, I think, tries to make Holly this good, strong character. You know, she's chosen her career over her marriage, or as Argyle has said, you didn't really support her career.
Right.
Because I mean, honestly, McClane's excuse for why he doesn't leave New York is incredibly weak. You know, I'm a New York cop.
He says like 6 months of backlog case. Yeah, it's bullshit.
Whereas Holly, like, this is, if she turns down this promotion, that may be the end of the line for her, in her career. So for her to want to take it is not unreasonable. But she got the Rolex watch as a reward for closing this big deal, right? So
that is the reason they had the Christmas party.
The unclasping of the watch and the letting go of the watch is basically reinforcing her letting go of her career. And then, of course, we marry that, pun intended, with when they come out at the end and Holly says, that her name is Holly McClane, right? And she drops the use of her maiden name again. And then, it becomes very traditional in the sense of like, she's taken her name. There seems to be an implication that she's giving up on the job. Maybe not. I mean, the movie doesn't literally say that she's like going to quit her job, but certainly there's a symbolism of letting go of the watch, letting go of this career thing that's represented by the watch. That you know, I wish was a little different, because even in the 80s, I think there could have been a way to balance that a little bit more, you know, in terms of, yes, we can have a happy ending where they end up together and the marriage, again, we know that later on it won't work, but that, you know, it ends on a happy note. But
it never feels like John McClane's going to move to California with her. You know what I'm saying? Like, I never feel like he is going to come here. If it is going to work, she's going to go there. Like that is the impression I felt, which feels weird. I get
when you combine that with what Donovan was saying about her being all lovey-dovey, looking into his eyes at the end, and the fact that, I mean, I get it. And part of me really likes the fact that he only says, I'm sorry to Al, and he never says it to her. But then when you take that and you take how she treats him, and you take the wedding, you know, the name, and you take the watch, it all comes together to me just a little too much, even for the 80s, you know, in terms of not letting her have something out of all of this too. You know?
All you needed was like one line. To do it. Like John just needed like one line at the end that implied a new dynamic in the relationship or something, and it's there. So it definitely feels, I think that's the frustrating part, is it just feels like, you needed one sentence and you could have, you know, gotten to a better place.
There's something there, because he has made these realizations, and presumably he has changed. But then at the end, when it comes down to it, who does the actual changing when they come together? It's her, right? It's not him. And that's the frustration, is that he has said these things, but then when it comes right down to it, it's just knowing that he feels that way inside is enough. She's still the one who has to make the more external changes. Although, again, to their credit, she doesn't say like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and we'll go back to New York, which they could have done, and that would have been worse. But you know, so it's, you know, and again, we're talking about an 80s movie, so we were really trying to, you know, balance things, but a little bit more for me would have been nice.
Yeah, I agree. I think that adds a little bit to the idea, like the way they use the whole last name plot device is anti-Holly, kind of like it's painted like she was wrong for doing this, which is subjective either way, is kind of like, you know, but I guess I feel like John was shown to be wrong in, like, I guess in just how he was handling himself, but he never really apologizes. Like, and he's definitely being just like a not good husband. And then she's like painted as, oh yeah, she changed her name. That's she's crossed a line. But then she comes back over at the end. You know, it's kind of like this. She's you know, seeking penance, or like, you know, like forgiveness for doing this horrible thing, like changing my name, and I'm going back on. I don't know. I agree with you. It just felt a little bit like too 80s.
What do you think? First of all, what's your thought on it?
Well, first of all, you two are sons of bitches for putting a chink in the armor. First of all,
that you can't argue with.
I can't argue with it. I'll say, and I agree with everything you guys said. But I'll say this: in the script, it almost like they were trying a little bit more, because Al's like almost trying to play. He said he was sorry, and he's like kind of interrupts him, kind of thing. There's that in there, and it seemed like the way they handled that whole thing. By the way, I love it. Whenever he comes out there in the movie, he comes out there. They're looking for each other, even though Powell's like standing sideways and the crowd looking like, I mean, it makes no sense, but it looks fucking incredible. Yeah. And they see each other's eyes and they're like, oh, we did this and everything else. And they say a lot with a little. They hug each other. And the
But how did they know they were each other?
They can just tell. Yeah.
Dude.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Completely. I was totally on board with that.
I do too. But it is that thing where like they lock eyes and they just knew.
I mean,
that's
clearly,
the guy I've been talking
to. Powell
hours.
knows who McClane is, because McClane looks like shit.
Okay, sure. Yes.
And then the other thing is that everyone is moving around, but Powell is like there. So, looking, he's the only one.
You're right. So John was probably thinking, "Who the hell is this guy staring at?" Oh, that's him.
Yeah. Well, the music is real. I'm sorry,
listen,
Bruce.
I'm giving you shit.
The music, the camera moves, their acting. I like. It's like that's the shit that I watch movies for right there, and I love it.
Yeah. Well, and especially in the script, I feel like one or two of these lines aren't in the movie, although I'd have to go back and look. But the way it's written, in terms of being critical about the thing with Holly, maybe we shouldn't, because really the marriage is is Powell and McClane. I mean, McClane comes out, Al, you here? McClane, man, or Al, man, you were my rock. I couldn't have made it without you. This is what a husband and wife are supposed to be saying to each other, and he's saying it to Powell instead. And and Powell's the one who he spills his heart out to, on the radio. So I don't know, maybe there's a whole gay subtext to this movie that we never even knew about.
Maybe.
Well, I will say, playing off Donovan's body cop, I do feel like if Die Hard 2 started with them two as partners in cop, I would like, that feels right, kind of for the end of this movie. Well,
what's interesting there is that in the first of all, Holly gets even less to do in the second movie. She gets like absolutely fucking nothing to do besides just be there.
Is she as involved in the plot though, like as a part of it?
Real
Motivator,
quick,
at least.
No, yeah.
Real quick, there's
she
planes.
Gets a great moment though, but yeah.
She does. There's planes flying in the air, like they're fixing to land and they're running out of gas. And basically the terrorists say, if you don't give us our demands, we're going to make the planes crash. And she's on the plane, so it's a ticking clock situation there. Also, the reporter she punches is also like one of the passengers on the plane, and they have conflict again. Powell's called in the second one, and he helps him with like a background check, and that's it for Powell for the rest of the franchise after that. But in the third one,
because he got his career in Family Matters.
But in the third one, when McTiernan directs again, it's all buddy cop with Samuel L. Jackson. And it also involves another group.
Although he's not a cop, but
Although he's not a cop. So as I'm saying, it's interesting. Like the director went back to this buddy cop thing. So
another Gruber, like another relative of Hans.
I'm Jeremy Irons.
Oh, okay.
I'm giving you spoilers, but I doubt you'll watch it. So
I might some point. I mean,
I'm going to watch them all again over the next month or two.
I would have never watched any of the other Die Hard movies, but now that I've seen the first one, I kind of feel like I can actually start. Like if they're just on TV or something, I can just watch it, and at least I have
fun.
Basic.
Hey, Die Hard 2 is a good action movie.
Are.
It's just literally almost beat for beat the first movie, and I say that it's not. I mean, it's just like it's too similar.
Yeah.
The third one I think is phenomenal. I'm telling you, I think it's great. So. But
also got to point out in that final scene with Al, all of the paper that's falling like snow, which is fantastic. Because the funny thing about the paper, and they don't even try to disguise it, it's all blank paper.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
There's not even a sense that it's like paperwork from files. It's like literally the copy room blew up and all the blank paper just like shot out the window, and it all falls like snow.
But it feels like it's like an LA Christmas miracle, right?
Exactly.
Like that's the mood it feels, and you just love it. You're like, cool.
Well,
I'm into it.
Everything. So let's do a count real quick. So we didn't talk about it, but Argyle gets to punch out Leo.
Yeah.
And takes Leo out. Holly gets to punch the reporter, takes him out.
Mm-hmm.
McClane takes out Gruber as well as
the rest.
Huey Lewis, and then Powell gets to do whatever his name, Carl. Is it weird for you guys that Carl comes in like a last hoorah at the end? I'm just asking.
No, that felt very like typical, almost like that. Like I was almost like it's like a classic kind of like fake threat at the end of a lot of like movies, like from like the action style movies where it's like, oh no, and then it's not, like they deal with them like without anything. I'm trying to think of like, I know it's like I've seen that type of scene in countless times, but I'm having trouble like recalling another example.
It feels like a trope that happens a lot, but like I feel like the gap in which it happens in this one is abnormally long. You know what I'm saying? And I'm fine with it, but you know.
Well, I mean, you can be critical of it because there's no way that Carl escapes.
No.
His chain is wrapped around a neck and he's hanging from the ceiling. I don't know how he gets out of that. Versus when other characters who we thought were dead, a lot of times they're just laying on the ground somewhere and we think that they're dead, and then they're not and they come back. So you could be critical, but again, it's not it's an emotional beat. It's not really a plot beat, right? I mean, it's about giving Al his moment. It's a fun moment, super dramatic, the way we just see the close up of the gun, and then we rack focus finally on the end to see his face, and
it's fun. I mean, you never take it seriously in terms of like, but it's still like, I guess it's like one of those, it's like an accepted not surprise that is still fun and like an accepted part of the experience almost.
I guess I think we kind of tracked everyone's arcs and kind of discussed them and everything. Yeah. I guess my last question is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I told you in the beginning, when I came into it, I was like, okay, I've heard, like, I assumed it was just, it takes place on Christmas Eve, and like you get some Christmas decor, the Christmas party aesthetic, we're done. But no, like the amount of Christmas songs that are part of the soundtrack, the fucking snow at the end. I mean, it feels like they're intentionally making this a Christmas movie in a way that I think is great. It's like the best Christmas action film. Probably.
He even kills somebody and says, ho, now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
My wife says no, by the way. I told her the other day, I was like, I got to watch Die Hard. And she's like, you and I just have completely different tastes in Christmas movies. And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm watching it for a podcast. But she clearly just dismissed it out of hand as a Halloween movie. I don't know if it's a Halloween movie or not.
How is it Halloween?
I mean, excuse me. I keep saying Halloween.
But what's interesting, though, right there, she said we have different tastes in Christmas movies.
Christmas movie, yes.
Implying she acknowledges it's a Christmas movie.
Well, because what she is saying is you think it's a Christmas movie and I don't, right? But here's a question, and this could get interesting. We could probably do a whole thing just on Christmas movies.
Yeah.
It seems to me, and I'm not opposed to people considering it a Christmas movie, but for me, a Christmas movie is one that only feels appropriate to watch around Christmas. Right?
See, like, I can watch
Elf. Would you anytime. Watch like Elf or Christmas Vacation in June?
Elf, yes.
See, I wouldn't watch those movies in June. They would not be nearly as entertaining. Whereas, of course, Die Hard is,
Yeah. Well, it's funny you said that because as I watched this today at work, my boss, I happened to walk by him and he said, you know what? I finally think Die Hard's a Christmas movie. I said, Jason, it's a Christmas movie. And he said, because he said, normally I could watch Die Hard at any time during June, or he literally said June or July. Yeah. And he said, but I kind of come around to it. I'm going to watch it tonight, actually. I think it's a Christmas movie now. And I think it's a very valid point. Sure. My criteria for a Christmas movie, and answer first, I would never watch Christmas Vacation other than December 25th, ever.
Right.
Never would. But I would watch Die Hard whenever I fucking want to.
Exactly.
But to me, the only criteria is it has to have Christmas happening around it. That's it for me.
I think
Lethal Weapon to me is a Christmas movie. I watch it every Christmas. I watched it. I watched Die Hard. I obviously watched Jingle All the Way. I watched Christmas Vacation. Think anyway.
And I'll make this point. For me, I hear your point. I think that's a valid point. It's a good thing we can all define our own versions of Christmas movies. But
what is
Christmas? I do think it's maybe like watching this now, like in December, late December, it did feel more fun. Like the Christmas stuff felt more cool,
more resonant,
and more fun, and more like, like this feels in theme right now. And while you're right, it doesn't. It's easily. It doesn't need
both of those.
It doesn't need Christmas,
right? For me, a Christmas movie is a movie that I'm going to watch between Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? But
that's the only time I've ever watched Die Hard.
But you could say if the movie is more resonant during that time, it's a Christmas movie too. And I might say no, but I could see why someone would say that. And yeah, I could see where you'd say, okay, well, Die Hard is more resonant during Christmas.
See, now I'm having to come up with more Christmas, because there's got to be more Christmas movies I like that I watch not at Christmas, and I'm just now you've made me.
Well, from the art cinema side of things, the equivalent of Die Hard is Eyes Wide Shut. Right. So Eyes Wide Shut is, another movie that is a totally not feeling Christmas movie that
I don't know if I
happens
want to
at
watch
Christmas.
that on Christmas, guys. Yeah, I don't
Right,
know.
it happens at Christmas. So, so for our friend Mark Thiedemann, that's like his Christmas movie is
right.
Eyes Wide Shut. So,
Yes.
yeah.
It should be Die Hard, Mark. Just saying, but I mean, like to me, Die Hard is. Granted, I say Lethal Weapon's a Christmas movie. It's not like. I mean, I say it is, and I believe it is, but Die Hard is even more so, just because. Right now I'm literally staring at a book that says Die Hard Christmas, and it's a kid's book, like Die Hard. I'm staring at it right now, but like it's got too many things. It's got, you've got the decorum, you've got the music, you've got, I mean, even the end of it, it's like a fairy tale. Yeah. It's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
And it's got too many things that check off the boxes for me.
It integrates Christmas a lot more than maybe some other.
Yeah,
I agree.
Non-Christmas genre movies that take place at Christmas. I would agree with that.
And one thing I personally, I love Shane Black as a writer, and he's always known for including Christmas in his movies. And so like, I just, like Lethal Weapon, Long Kiss Goodnight. I'm trying to think, Last Boy Scout, and Bruce Willis is in that too. Those are all to me, I wouldn't say they're Christmas movies besides Lethal Weapon, but they all have Christmas in them, So it also helps because I think it was just super smart, whether they meant to or not. But when you do that, it ties a tradition to a movie, and then Christmas is timeless. I mean, other than the technology, I say timeless, whatever. But other than the technologies in the movie, like you can watch that and. I don't know. It just good or bad. It brings up memories of Christmas to you. So it's, it's a smart move on their part, I think.
Yeah.
That was good. I feel like that was a really good discussion of Die Hard. I feel like we hit.
I will say one last thing.
Stuff.
When I taught at UC, when I did my classes at UCA for bonus points on the test, they had to answer a crossword puzzle at the end. And the question was, is Die Hard a Christmas movie? And the answers, and they were crossword, and you had to circle one. The answers were yes, fuck yes, yippee-ki-yay yes. Like it was like that was all the answers. There was no no's because there's no option. And I told them, I said, if you don't circle one of them, you're not getting the points. So anyway, I was trying to condition a different crowd, but no, I think we did a good podcast, and it was fun. It's a good one because it's Christmas, and I'm, don't get me wrong. I won't sleep tonight because now I'm going to keep thinking about Holly not having a complete arc in the movie. But other than that, I think it was very, very fun and productive.
Yeah, I agree. I want to mention at some point you mentioned like all the other movies that Die Hard sparked. If you guys aren't aware of it, I would definitely recommend the movie High Risk. With Jet Li, which is Hong Kong, Die Hard.
Yes.
It also has another title.
Did it come out after Die Hard?
Yeah, it came out in 1995, sort of right at the end of the height of the Hong Kong movement. It's definitely watch it at some point. It's the same basic idea, and I think there's even some scenes. It's been forever since I've watched it. Some scenes that are almost direct ripoffs, but of course. Rather than, Bruce Willis McClane, it's Jet Li running around in an amazing Hong Kong movie doing all kinds of actiony stuff. So
that sounds fun.
I gotta watch it. It looks great. I'm looking at the poster right now. It's also called Meltdown.
Meltdown, yes, that's the other title. Yeah.
Yeah, Meltdown. Looks great. Yeah, of course you got like people say Speed. Under Siege is Die Hard on a boat. Right. Speed is Die Hard on a bus.
We should come up with like
Speed
a list.
2 is Die Hard on a cruise ship, and that is a really terrible movie.
A great crash sequence, though. At the end, no one has. It's awful. Yeah. I've seen it, but it's it's called Speed 2 Cruise Control.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah. They didn't want people to do that, did they?
No, Sandra Bullock
is in it. Yeah, but Keanu smartly was not. So
at the time it had the biggest, the most expensive stunt ever performed, which is when the boat. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Crash a boat into the shore. Yeah.
Fun facts for you. Yeah. Oh, another fun fact: whenever they drop Alan Rickman, he actually got dropped for a little bit, and that's his reaction is kind of real. So. It was green screen, but they actually dropped him. He was like, shit. And he didn't expect it. Yeah. And you got a good performance out of him because of it.
Okay.
Yeah, fun
Interesting.
facts.
Yeah.
So
But no,
trick
guys.
your actors.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the lesson. Trick your actors.
Hopefully, we'll come back again relatively soon in the new year. I know we've got a few more podcasts coming out. Maybe one more before the end of the year, and Mandalorian.
Other than this, we got one in the hopper. This one.
Yep. Yeah,
and
then
then Mandalorian.
And then I think we might have Wonder Woman 84 on the horizon.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
HBO Max.
I'm looking forward to, that's something maybe we should do. Maybe not this time, maybe next time, is have a side convo on the landscape of cinema right now. And
I would love to.
It's changing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Industry
interesting
talk,
things happening.
Yeah,
a lot of
things happening. Well, Daniel, how can our listeners write into us?
You can write into bit.ly/241mail. There, let us know if you think. I almost said cry hard. I don't know why, but I almost said cry hard.
There's a lot of
now
tears
assuming
in the
there has
movie.
to be a cry hard like
Let's look
spoof
it up.
movie or something. So bit.ly/241mail. Let us know if you think Die Hard is a Christmas movie, or what you think of it at all. If you're like me and you haven't watched it, or this was your first time watching it, love to hear what your takes are, your hot takes. And yeah, let us know. Write in. Oh, you know what? And actually, as an aside, Joel wrote into us concerning our previous Mandalorian episode, but we will be reading that on our next Mandalorian episode, just to keep everything making sense. Because if we were responding to Mandalorian questions and feedback now, it would be confusing. So look out for that,
sense.
Joel. We definitely got the message. We'll be talking about that on our next Mandalorian episode. But write in bit.ly/241mail.
Great. And of course, if you haven't, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. That way you're up to date on all future episodes. And if you can't hit our bit.ly, then go and leave us a comment in the comment section below on our YouTube channel. And of course, if you want to listen on podcasts, all podcast services are up. And for more podcasts, 241, go to podcast241.com. Guys, I really enjoyed this one. Obviously, I'm smiling the whole time. My face kind of hurts actually a little bit. And I'm like, man, it's almost 10 o'clock, but maybe I can squeeze in Die Hard 2 real quick. So like, that's what I'm thinking.
Bruce, did you have something?
Yeah, just before we wrap, I want to mention my blog, thehutchfiles.com. So besides doing my own stuff and my own narrative breakdowns, anytime we do a movie on here, I also put my breakdown and some points maybe that we make on here, but also some interesting points about the movie on there as well. So you can find my exact times and goals for all the act structure stuff, as well as some observations about the movie. I haven't put that up yet, but it'll come soon.
That's awesome. I'll make sure we put a link in the comments on our
I've been seeing you
channel.
post about it on Instagram. So that's really cool. Yep.
Cool. Is it, you said BD? Yeah, it's BD Hutch Files.
No, it's The Hutch Files.
The Hutch Files. Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
The X-Files. Thehutchfiles.com.
Thehutchfiles.com. Do you have like a basement where you like write the Hutch Files and it's like real dark and moody and stuff? Is that what's happening?
I definitely need a poster that says "I believe" somewhere above me.
You need to get some like mock like X-Files ripoff Hutch Files stuff intentionally.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Well, guys, thank you guys again so much for doing this. It's a treat for me. And as always, my name is Donovan Thompson.
I'm Daniel Wingfield.
And I'm Bruce Hutchinson.
And yippee-ki-yay, motherfuckers, because we have spoken.